classrooms. And so one of the things I think is really important to know just off the bat, modular classrooms sort of sound like, oh, it's easy, just, back the trailer up and drop them off. And so just to give some context, modular classrooms cost about $650,000 per 2-unit pod. And so what's a 2-unit pod? It literally means 2 classrooms. And so that is irrespective of any cost of excavation, laying a foundation for that to sit on. It's not the same as just bringing in, like a mobile structure in another venue when you're dealing with school, property. There's lots of specifications that these mobile units have to meet in order to be able to be approved by NYSED, right? So everything we're talking about NYSED approval. It's not the easiest process. It's very specific, the things that need to be done. So the cost of excavation, electrification, life safety systems in terms of fire and smoke detection, et cetera. And other factors to consider is just, we would have to fit that for our technology, any of the technology infrastructure that we need to be able to utilize our tech in that structure is something that we would need to consider. And then also wireless access and any updates, enhancements, improvements that we would need to do for security for the rest of our campus. Something to just put on the back burner when we're thinking about this is 650,000 is the baseline cost, right? So it's like the base model, and then we would have to add all of the things that we need to make it an appropriate school structure.
One thing before you go off though, I mean, Mayor Doro left that message for us, and there was I thought some interesting points in there. What could we get if we shut Elm Drive down and sold the property? What could we get for it? Could we use that money? Can that money be used to buy these units? How, could we move all of our traffic and teachers and students to Alden Place? And we would, on one hand, we'd actually fix the issues with Elm Drive. So I think before we just kind of dismiss it, we should look at, or at least get the background information on, what could we get out of this? Could we sell that property, I don't know, to a developer and then take that money and apply that towards the middle school, or apply that towards the Alden Place? What would we expect from, what would we need from the village to expand Alden Place, the road, not Alden Place, the facility or campus, to handle this? Like I said, there was, in his suggestion, there was some interesting pieces that I think Mayor Doro, may have given us, some things we need to look at. So anyway, that's my personal opinion.
I don't disagree with that. We also have to remember that the community overwhelmingly said no to this.
I know, but that was,
that was a handful of years ago.
Yeah.
However many years ago. I'm not saying that, we should set a policy to do it. I just think that, I think it's a good thing to know that, if the district could get X dollars for the Elm Drive property, what could we, now you take that, can you apply that? And I'm assuming you can, but I don't know. You apply that to the fixes we need to take care of. So I'd like to keep that on, at least personally, I'd like to keep that on the list of things that we should evaluate.
Right, and so
closing, I have a question now. Closing or selling a property though, wouldn't that need to go to vote?
yeah, so I was just gonna respond. So without any specificity, I have no idea how much money that property could sell for. That's not my area of expertise. I also have no idea with a contingent sale based on the approval of a plan for, development. I have no idea, right? All I can say to you is that the questions that I can answer, it would require a vote to sell and or to, decommission for any purpose, just to close it and leave it vacant would require, the community input. And then also, if we were to sell it, to be able to utilize that money, that would also require an affirmative vote from the community. So, nothing that could be decided here and now to say, yep, and that's the direction we're going. So what we've been doing since November, and I think I've said this publicly a couple of times, until this roof is shored up and is repaired, replaced, whatever that be, we are living in a period of having to plan for what ifs, right? So we have worked as an administrative team. We've worked with several different committees that already exist in the school district on what's called continuity of operations plans and or COOP plans. And so we've had to look at multiple permutations of what catastrophic failures could potentially come to be. And so what would we do if, right? So we've looked at if a portion of the middle school were to be damaged to the point where it could no longer be occupied, for example, the auditorium, right? So the auditorium thankfully is not something that's used on a daily basis or isn't necessarily needed on a daily basis. We do sometimes have band and or chorus rehearsals there, but it's not an insurmountable obstacle at this point. We're able to repurpose other space for that. But if a wing of this building were to be damaged to a point that it could no longer be inhabited, we've had to create plans for that. We've had to create plans for what I have said could likely involve an entire building, which is the concern of the boilers at either of the elementary schools failing. We've had to make considerations for what would we do then. And we actually have been reviewing the feasibility study from 2017-18. So I hear what you're saying, that was an overwhelming, community push at that time, don't close the building. But that, it is somewhat outdated, right? And so we've been looking at the parts of it that I think are really pertinent and applicable to the conversations we're having now. So interestingly enough, one of the things that was in the feasibility study was the scope of work that they recommended be done within 5 years of that study. Based on the building condition survey from 2015. So the study was published in the 2017-18 school year. But a building condition survey had happened in the 2015 school year. And those figures they're listed for a total of just under $19 million were recommended be done. And the way that it was worded was recommended to be initiated within 5 years of the study to maintain conditions of district buildings for the next generation. And so obviously, one of the things that we have said publicly is that this work was not initiated, right? Nothing has been initiated in this timeframe. And just one thing that we wanted to just remind everybody, anybody who's watching, is that building conditions survey costs are for in-kind replacement and do not represent any calculation for anything in terms of an enhancement to a system. One of the things that we've now become much more focused and I guess just aware of is air quality, right? Since the COVID pandemic, those kinds of concerns that we've talked about, bringing in fresh treated air kind of thing. So something interesting to note is that if we looked at the inflation projection, and this is using the figures of 5%, which is the sort of conservative, our construction managers, financial planners, they sort of speak about 5% inflation compounding each year that these projects are pushed off. We would be looking at this point in time about $35 million of work, just considering what was identified in 2015. So just a cost of delaying is about, $11,775,000 just by putting this work off. That's how much more it would have costed today, or cost today. And so when you look at the off-cycle elective building condition survey that we did in 21-22. By that point, there were additional systems, additional buildings, additional work that needed to be done that was identified as priority for the 1 to 5 year time frame. And that already had increased from that 18 million figure to $41 million, right? So that's the baseline. The baseline in 2015 was $18,775,000 that needed to be done. By 21-22, the baseline of work that was recommended to be done had already crept to 41 million plus. And so, you know, we're looking at about $23 million of additional work that was identified just that 6 years later. And that's because these systems over time, they degrade, right? They break down. There's an end of useful life that's coming up for any of these systems. As we sit here and speak about what we are not going to do. And again, these are the systems that are common throughout the buildings, the HVAC, the electrical systems, the plumbing, the lighting, all of the things. There's no surprises in here. Those were the things that were identified then. There are things that were identified in 21, just in additional areas of the other buildings as well. So almost $23 million of additional work was identified. And so when you're looking about the escalated costs from 21 to now 2025, there's an escalation from $41,747,467, which was the building condition survey, and then the total estimated cost with escalation is again creeping up over $6 million to $48,009,587. And again, these are pure construction costs. Building condition surveys only respective of the in-kind replacements, no enhancements. So it's just illustrative of the fact that the longer we wait, the more and more these things are creeping up. The more and more these things are becoming problematic. Other systems are failing. We saw it with the roof just last year. There was one projected cost of the roof now in December, and we have pictures and we have information related to that. Just from December until now, the additional damage of the roof, right? So those cost estimates are different than what they were last year. So we just need to keep in mind that every week, day, month that goes by, we're looking at new damage. And so we just have to be very considerate of that in the message that we are putting out to the public. This can't wait anymore. And so part of what we've been doing is looking at the feasibility study and looking at where we are now and really trying to compare. So since the feasibility study, we've added our pre-K program. Our pre-K program is by law capped at 18 students. The district, when it originally conceived the idea of pre-K, had decided to be conservative, keep it small in alignment with our goals throughout the district to keep small class sizes. And we capped our program at 15 students per class. And so this year we had 2 classrooms, but in other years we've had 3 classrooms of pre-K. We've additionally added an 811 special class program, bringing our own students who are being educated outside of the district, bringing them back into district. So that added another classroom. So that's 3 classrooms, sometimes 4 classrooms, depending on those pre-K numbers, to the Elm Drive School. And in the middle school, the 811 special class program was initiated a couple of years ago. Again, bringing our students back into district to service them here at home with their neighborhood peers. Those students have reached an age where it's appropriate to educate them in the high school next year. And so we are planning to bring additional students back from out of district programs and creating a new classroom or maintaining a new classroom here in the middle school for the 25-26 school year to bring more of our students back and educate them here. And so conservatively, we've had 5 new classrooms. These are self-contained programs that cannot be integrated elsewhere. Added, like I said, sometimes that pre-K has been a 6th classroom as well. And also we have an increase of population of English language learners. Our population total has increased to 6% of our total student population. And in some cases, those classes do require a non-integrated setting. So depending on the level of language acquisition of the students that program is serving, it could be true that they require in each building their own pull-out program classroom for a portion of the day, if not, it's not the entire day, but for a portion of the day. So since the feasibility study, I think it's just important to note, when I was looking back, one of the things that I thought was very interesting is that the assumptions in the feasibility study were made based in 2018, based on numbers that are listed there. Pre-K, it was not applicable, but we didn't have pre-K at that time. That was still like, you know, not even a little figment of our imaginations, but the K2 program was capped at 22. The assumptions were 22, 24, and 26 respectively for the 3, 6, and 7, 12 levels. But what has actually been true is pre-K has been 15, as I said, even though the law requires each classroom to stay under 18 with an aide. Our K2 program has been capped at 18. Our 3-6 program has been capped at a target of 20. And our 7-12 program has been capped at 22. And so when you look at the difference in the number of rooms that were reported in the feasibility study, we actually, and I'm just talking about regular general education classrooms, we actually have 3 additional classrooms that we're occupying based on the numbers that we have had in open discussion about our class size goals for the district. So it is different than what the feasibility study was based on in the first place. But just being transparent, we have 3 additional general education classrooms at the K2 level based on the numbers 18. We have 4 at the 3-6 level, and actually when I was looking through the numbers, using the number of 20, we could have a 5th. We actually are over that in one of the areas. And then for 7-12, we have 5 additional classrooms, mostly in the middle school, because the high school, it's not really, you can't really just divide. Doesn't really work that way because kids take all different patterns of classes. So this is really more of like a middle school 5, and then again, that it could be 1 in one of those grade levels, an additional 6 additional room that's being used. So the feasibility study data is sort of not on target with where we have been and where we have been operating for the past however many years. And again, that doesn't include the self-contained classrooms that I just mentioned. Yes.
Most of us weren't on the board back in when the feasibility study was initiated.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain the purpose of that, or how the study was initiated in the first place?
Because I was not really
Well,
involved in that. I can tell you a little bit about it, right? So from what I understand is it was exactly what the conversation has been, whether or not we needed to occupy the space in all 4 buildings. The feasibility is how can we maintain our programs in a different configuration and or footprint. That was the purpose. What I can tell you is that these assumptions are listed on page whatever of the feasibility study. Very clear, plain language that these are the assumptions that they operated on, and it came based on the contract, the teacher's contract, which says it can go up to no more than 25 at the elementary level, 27 at the secondary level. And so that's what it was based on, right? And so in my time here, I can tell you that those have never been the targets. And so I know that there have been times when we have exceeded the number, and then I believe that there was even a mid-year, Tom, you may remember this a little better than I, there was a mid-year addition of another section because right, the class size at Elm Drive, I think it went from 3 sections to 4 sections of kindergarten after the school year had started at one point because there was so many students. And so, you know, just being transparent, that we have this feasibility study that was issued, that's been out there, that the conversation's been based on, and to say that I don't really think that those numbers are the numbers that, have truly been operationalized. And so I wanted to just go back to, the concept of, well, let's just close Elm Drive Elementary School, right? Let's just put that on the table for a minute and kind of talk about what would that even mean? So it would increase the traffic on Alden Place. The one thing that we kind of have mulled over this most recently, I think it was our district leadership team meeting when we had a conversation about right now, the pattern of transportation is that half of our buses go to Elm Drive, half of our buses go to Alden Place. Then they flip flop, thereby sort of delaying a little bit of the bus congestion in the morning and PM as well. That would not be any longer, right? So that all of the buses would be going to one building at one time. So would all of the parents who are driving their child and or picking up their child from school. So that would increase the congestion on Alden Place, which has already been problematic, right? Publicly, we've already had complaints about congestion on Alden. And so that would be something that, would maybe cause other issues for community members. Additionally, we would have to increase the lunch production in the Alden Place kitchen, which would require potentially additional lunch periods depending on our APR facility. One of the situations with the APR facility is APR being all-purpose room. It's also utilized for PE classes. Additional students would require additional PE classes. And so there's a competition for space, right? How do we have all of our lunch periods and have all of our PE classes all in one space, all during the school day, and in appropriate times for kids to eat breakfast and then eat lunch and have PE somewhere in the middle there. There's also some grade level specific classroom requirements. So pre-K and kindergarten are required to have bathrooms in their classrooms. There's a limited number of classrooms at Alden Place that actually have that set up right now. So enough at the moment. If our enrollment were to increase significantly in any time, we might be in a situation where we would have to retrofit classrooms, add bathrooms, etc. We're not there right now, but it could be in a situation where we might have to consider that in the future. Right now, we would have enough classrooms, but the last thing would be the staff break room is required. We're required by contract to have a break room. So that's just something to think about. That would have to have running water. So it's just another space issue. So we looked at what would it be like, right? What would it be like if we were conservative with our numbers? We decreased sections wherever we potentially could that was right on the brink of those ideal class size targets. And so without anybody panicking that they'll be losing their classroom next year or anything crazy like that, we just pretended that Elm Drive was moving to Alden Place. So we started to do an overlay using 2 pre-K classrooms, 2 kindergarten classrooms. Again, if we were not to get, sort of an influx in enrollment for kindergarten, could we feasibly have 2 classes? I guess so. They're our youngest learners. That's the most developmental age, but it is one of our smaller classes. So could we potentially do it? Possibly. So those would be our classrooms with bathrooms. Additionally, we have 3 grade 1, 3 grade 2, 3 grade 3 up at the top. We would have some AIS pullout rooms. We have 4 AIS teachers, 2 for math and 2 for reading. And so there would be those would be shared spaces. We have some E&L staff. We have 2 full-time teachers at the elementary level. That would be a shared space. If you see SC1 and SC2, we have a self-contained special education classroom from Elm Drive. We also have a self-contained special education classroom from Alden Place. Those would be down in the bottom right there. That's the existing faculty room and band room. Band would have to go on the stage. We would maintain some of the other classes as they're labeled there. Those that are labeled IEP, those are spaces that are required by students' IEPs for the provision of related services. So those rooms essentially are used during the day for those services pretty much exclusively. and couldn't really be, repurposed for anything else. The art room would stay the art room. I was thinking about that. Could we, combine spaces and use different, configurations for things like that? But then remembering that right now we have shared, art between two buildings, we would have all of those art classes in one building, and then it might make the most sense just to leave art in one classroom, right? Because we'll be doing art all day long. Same with library, same with music, and then we have band. So when we look at this, we say, well, where's fourth grade and where's fifth grade, right? And so that brings me to the next point, essentially just one thing. And this is just being reminded that we would have shared rooms for IEP pullouts. Any student that needs to go for like a research room or something like that, we would be using shared spaces for those classes. AIS, which is academic intervention, ENL pullout, which is our English as a new language, and also our PE is shared with cafeteria. So there are significant constraints when we're talking about the space with the shared building, with the shared program that we have currently. So it brings me to my next point, which is the middle school is the priority, right? We can talk about a long-term plan of how we want to reconfigure the district. We can, the administration is not going to stand here and say, we don't care what the community wants. If that's the direction that the community wants to go in, then, we're going to do that. We work for the community ultimately, but the bottom line is we can't do any of that without the middle school space, right? And it's really irresponsible to consider moving another 120 something students into this building for the inevitable, which is some kind of roof failure that may render this building inhabitable for a period of time. So that is where we really wanted to just sort of drive this direction. We need to do something about this middle school. We can talk about whatever it is that the board and or the community would like to consider subsequent to that, but our priority has to be repairs for middle school. We added some examples of the existing building conditions. For anybody who's watching at home, this is on the second floor of the middle school. That on the left-hand side is the second floor of the middle school where there's actual rain coming into the building. Thankfully, that was not falling above anything that we could not do without for a time being. But adjacent to our permanent records room, and so something to be considered that it could have been a major issue if that were on the other side of that wall, essentially. And again, to the right, you can't see it as well, but that's another example of water just falling full stream in the middle school building. This is on the first floor of the middle school, I guess you would say, above the auditorium, but the first main level of the middle school. And again, it's just a steady stream of water pouring in, right? So that is why you have a roof, so you do not have the weather conditions inside. And this is a good example of the roof not doing what it's intended to do and keeping the weather out, and providing shelter. And so this is the current conditions of everything that is important is tarped. And it is tarped because we cannot have a situation where anything that we are required to keep, those are some of the permanent records, much of the permanent records. Thank you to Mr. Lipka on creating space in Alden. We've been able to move some of them out of this building to safer spaces. And but that is what they look like. If they are in this building, they are tarped. Any files in this building are tarped. At all times, we lift the tarp when we need to access them and we put the tarp back down. Not very convenient, but it's how we're living right now. And on the right-hand side, this is actually right outside this door, just a little ways. We have a catch basin into a drain bucket, also known as a garbage can, catching water, and that was from a bone dry water that had entered the roof at some point somewhere, and that is where it found its way through the other side, is right out here. And so I'm gonna just turn it over to Ellie, just go over what was learned in the exploration that happened in December And the reason for the exploration was some of the pictures and GIFs we just showed you.
Okay,
Yes.
really quickly, because I did pass that in the hall, did you have to move some kids from their lockers? Did it look like it was right in front of a locker?
I don't think those lockers are actually used.
Okay,
That bank of lockers, I don't.
They might have moved them.
okay.
They did move them?
Yeah, I believe so.
I didn't think those were
100%
used.
on it.
Hmm.
Yeah, so over the winter break, when we had the roof really assessed, we brought the architects, they actually subcontracted, a structural engineering specialist to look at our roof materials, top and bottom. And what they wanted to do was really open up as much as they could, look up into the ceiling and see what our different roofing systems were, where they covered the building. So what you're seeing here is examples of the poured gypsum sections of the roof, and to put it as simple as possible. It's a very similar process. Have you ever seen them pour concrete and they use chicken wire, like a metal chicken wire to reinforce it, so the concrete sits below and above and the metal chicken wire kind of binds it together. They do the same thing with gypsum. Gypsum functions like a plaster. It's poured into place. They use steel to reinforce it, and then they continue pouring on top of it, and then the impervious membranes, or the membranes that are supposed to be impervious, go on top of that. That's the rubber roof that you would see from the outside. What happens is, as the roof system starts to fail, the gypsum absorbs water. You can imagine like plaster would absorb water. You have a wall that used to be solid, and then you have a leak and that wall is no longer solid, or the ceiling is no longer solid. It's the same concept here. And so as you walk down the hallway, you may see some of this brown insulation material starting to bow and sag, and that was what alerted us initially to bring in this team to assess, was to see if that sagging insulation was indicative of a material failure beneath or above, technically, in that ceiling and roofing system. And so it is true that once we took out the insulation, the gypsum just started to crumble down. And that's why you see exposed sections of the steel chicken wire reinforced metal for that ceiling system in some of these photographs. Now, thankfully, that we did not find any evidence of rust. But I will say that just a couple of years ago, when we did the elective building condition survey, we didn't see any evidence of sag or intrusion to the extent that we're seeing it now. So we took core samples throughout the building as best we could assess. We didn't find any specific areas where the steel within the gypsum was failing, but it's inevitable because the gypsum itself is failing. And so what's happening is our architects came in. This is a diagram of the full middle school. The pink sections are the poured gypsum areas, and you can see on the left-hand side, that little inset, the board, we've shared that image with the board previously. Those red areas are how much water has been observed saturating our roofing system. So red means wet, and you can see that most of the roofing system here at the middle school has been saturated in perpetuity, honestly. At least over the last couple of years. Now, what you're looking at in the larger image is the color coding of the different roofing systems, and we have 4 of them. The pink areas being the poured gypsum, the green areas being steel deck, which is the most expensive and unfortunately the least common roofing system for us here. The yellow section is poured tectum. It's a different type of building system, but functions very similarly to the gypsum. It's poured in place. Insulation below, pour the material, put the metal reinforcement, and then the rubber roof on top. And the purple areas are concrete deck. So that's a little bit firmer, but again, concrete, much like plaster, gypsum, and tectum, once it gets impregnated with moisture, it loses its structural integrity. And so, to Caroline's point earlier, if we were to bring another 120 kids into this building, where would we put them? That wouldn't be affected by the current roof condition and potential construction. So when we look at this plan is very important because it helps us understand what areas need to be addressed first. And so the architects and engineers in their report told us that the middle section, you'll see middle wing priority 1, it's pretty small print, but you can see it right here. They're saying that this is the most critical area and followed very, like, he said it's 1 and 2, it's 1 and 1A, and it's really only less critical because it's less classroom space. But that being said, it is inclusive of our only large group instructional space in this building, other than the gymnasium and cafeteria, which again aren't necessarily designed for that. But as part of this assessment, what they did find is the hard plaster ceiling in the auditorium sitting area specifically is also failing due to the impregnation of water in the system above it. And so they could not recommend that we reopen it with any sort of immediacy unless that area is fully reconstructed. And that was the cost inflation that we discussed at our last board meeting when we said the numbers from November are what they were, but since November, we were seeing an additional upwards of a $7 million cost estimate to reconstruct the ceiling and related systems beneath. And that's what you just see that kind of outlined here. It just kind of talks through that, but essentially, if we don't fix the roof above the auditorium, we can't say that the ceiling will not continue to crumble, and we can't say that. So you want to go right into the numbers? So we had our financial advisors update our tax impact figures. And so before I throw the charts up on the screen, we disentangled Elm Drive Elementary School and Millbrook Middle School. We wanted to look at this building by building. Okay, there's been some discussion about scope. Well, can we just do some of the middle school or some of Elm? And what I want to just share with the board, and then we've touched on it briefly in the past, is some of these scopes of work are very much contingent upon each other. In order to upgrade and improve the heating and ventilation system of this building, we would be moving away from in-classroom unit ventilators like the one behind Mr. Hartswick and moving towards rooftop equipment. In order to put equipment on our roof that is failing, we want to redesign the roof and reconstruct it, reinforce it to be able to support the volume of equipment that would go up there. Additionally, classroom ventilation requirements have changed significantly since the time of construction of this building. This building was designed to utilize a house exhaust system, which means we blow air into the classrooms with each of these individual unit ventilators, and the air is pulled through those louvers in the classroom door. You see like the room we're in, and it's pulled out of the building through a central exhaust system. That is no longer permissible by code. And at most, you can have 2 rooms exhale on one common exhaust duct, which in very simple terms means for every 2 rooms in this building, we have to put another hole in the roof. And so it would be very challenging to do the roof without the heating and ventilation project, because you want that roof designed for every one of those new penetrations and all of that new structural steel to support the new equipment that doesn't currently live on the roof, but would logically under a new system design. So.
But excuse me, Elliot, couldn't you just, if you did a new roof and left the HVAC alone, wouldn't that, you're not touching the HVAC?
Correct, but when you do touch the HVAC, you risk voiding the warranty of the roof and throwing, I'd say, good money after bad, but having a redundancy and expense where you would have to reconstruct significant portions of the roof to provide the structural steel reinforcements and the additional penetrations, flashings, and things that go along with
So I
it.
understand the reasoning why you want to change it, then from what is mold, future mold conditions and such. But you could do a new roof and leave the HVAC the way it is currently.
But our HVAC system is also aging out, so the steel infrastructure therein is pushing us to have to replace it sooner than we want to.
Okay, I want that, but I want that explained to
Yes,
the
sir.
public.
So one of the things is, the infrastructure itself for our heating and ventilation system, the hot water pipes that run through the tunnels are 50+ years old. The rate of the last 50 years, they're approaching 60. So that's one of those perfect things that 10 years ago may not have been a top of list thing, but in 10 years, that steel has rotted and pitted and rusted. And we've shown leaks in the tunnels and other places. So it would be very challenging for us to face the community and say, we're good, when we know full well that that system as a whole is falling apart. And so it takes us beyond this piece of equipment is bad, put a new one in, because everything delivering energy to that piece of equipment needs to be upgraded. And so we're really faced with replace everything with archaic design or upgrade it and then marry it to another project.
Correct, and get another generation of life out of it.
And that's exactly right. The terminology that Caroline quoted from the feasibility study was to build it for the next generation, and get 30 more years out of it.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. So again, factors impacting funding, right? We talked about this in the past, but just to clarify for those that maybe haven't heard this messaging before, is we have retiring debt on the books. That means that there's old bonds from the bidding. A lot of that was from the construction of the high school that's going to be coming off of our tax rolls. And so we can fit in some of the new debt that would be incurred with this project right into that same portion of funding where the taxpayers would not feel an increase. So we can replace the old debt with new debt that would be bonded for this project. We also have state aid. We get about 23% from the state of the cost of construction. And then we're looking to leverage an energy performance contract in parallel to the bonded construction work that provides cost neutral options to add scope without burdening our taxpayers further. And again, we have a roughly $12 million in capital reserves and cash on hands to allocate directly to this project, delaying the need to incur debt by front loading our cash to fund the initial stages of construction. So with that being said, again, we broke this out by building. So for Millbrook Middle School, with the updated construction costs and related expenses for all of the scopes of work that we proposed in November, again, specifically the roof replacement, replacing these single pane windows, we've talked about that a lot, a full heating and ventilation system replacement, energy performance work that would be cost neutral, and making ADA access improvements to the campus, to the Millbrook Middle School building. And you can see how the chart breaks it out with a $37 million project cost for all of the work to be done at the middle school. We would get $5 million in aid. We would use $12 million in capital reserves and cash. We have $11.2 million of retiring debt that would be replaced. And so out of $37.8 million, there would be new debt service of $8.7 million. That's what the taxpayers would feel. And that's what's illustrated in that bottom line of approximately 32 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. Again, much like every projection we provide, this is not inclusive of star discounts. The star discount does manipulate that number slightly, but this is a good estimator. So if your house is worth $100,000 of assessed value, you would see a tax increase of $320 annually to support the Millbrook Middle School scope of work. And I'm going to show these numbers for each building separately so that the board can discuss and just see what that building scope of work impact looks like in a moment. What I want to share.
Again, Elliot, I think it bears repeating. If you have a star or it's enhanced star exemption, it will be less, correct?
Correct. So this is to be fair to all of our taxpayers, and we have a number of folks
You
that
have
have
no
second homes in
exemption,
the district.
then this is what it.
This is the impact.
This is the impact. If you have it, the star or enhanced star, it will be less.
Right, and we're looking at 32 cents on the $1,000 assessed value. Okay,
And the
So-
ADA improvements are the same that were included in the.
correct.
The
This would be
pass
the elevators from levels 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, and the lift from the auditorium base level to the level 1 and the egress point at the auditorium.
So if someone is sitting at home, listening to this, or they see it some other time and they want to figure out how much their house, how much their taxes would go up, how would you tell them to calculate based on that?
So I would tell them, look at your tax bill, right? This isn't a Zillow thing. This isn't your estimate. Like my neighbor's house just sold for $450. Does that mean my house is worth $425? Like, your taxable assessed value is typically significantly lower than what you would consider your market value to be in most of our 6 towns. So that's why the safe play is to just look at your tax bill, and this is just your school taxes. So this doesn't mean, you know, your overall taxes are gonna go up. This is just the focus school taxes.
Yeah, I think you need to do the numbers again.
That's not.
You said $100,000 house.
$32 for 100.
32.
$32.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so 400 would be the 320.
32, right?
Yeah.
Not 300.
Well, so like, that's what I'm
Well, a
saying, like, if my,
$500,000.
right, if my house is worth 500,000, just estimating it, I'm gonna multiply it by 0.32.
Mhm.
That comes out to 100, I did not do that right.
Well, it's $32 per 100,000, so it's 32 times 5.
Right,
So you might have been right. Whatever that number is.
160.
yeah, it's 160. If your house is worth 500,000.
Without star,
It would be just as, you would take 500 times 0.32, it's $160.
Yeah.
So that's just a
500.
general kind of guesstimate, so $160. If your house
A
is worth
year.
500, right, I just wanted, in case somebody's watching this, you know,
And you can get it exact. Take your tax bill,
right,
it'll tell you the assessed amount, multiply it by 0.32. That gives you the exact amount that your taxes would be.
Well,
And that dollar figure does
Divide
not
by
kick in.
account.
It's an approximate number.
Right. That's 2 years from now, that's not without STAR if you have it.
And
so-
that's the average, right? Because remember that there's also the equalization rates and everything, so that is the average.
The average
Right.
for all the homeowners in our catchment area, and again, this would not be levied until the debt is incurred.
Right.
So we're gonna take every bit of that $12 million that we have cash in reserves, and we're gonna front load all of our expenses during construction to the extent possible, and delay needing to incur any debt. And if we don't have to borrow it, we don't have to charge for it. So we wanna be very clear that when we were talking about this as a May 24 vote, this wasn't gonna hit till the 27-28 school year. By delaying it now a year, it may not hit until 27-28 or 28-29. It depends on how the timing of bidding and construction plays out, but this is minimally 2 to 3 years out.
And again, all the money that the school has, that 12, everything cannot be used without the
Correct.
public
Without voter
voting.
authorization.
Yes, for
Correct.
it.
So
Okay.
people that have said, well, you have $12 million, just
Right.
fix the roof. We can't actually do that. We
The
cannot,
public has to vote yes.
well, we can't access the funds.
Yep.
And we also can't perform the work. The voters need to authorize both the work and the money. This
Even if
is,
they did, that would leave us with $0 in the district as well.
well, if we leverage the rest of our cash reserves as well, but that's correct. And this is the state protecting our taxpayers. This is the state making sure that the board can't just decide to spend $12 million on what it wants, right? The voters have to authorize us to put the money away, to create the reserve and to fund it. Then they have to authorize us to access the reserve. And then they have to authorize us, like, they have to not just approve us to use the 12 million, but they have to approve what we spend it on, very specifically.
Thank you.
And the EPC, we could do that without having the voters approve it, but we would lose.
We would lose 10% building aid. Right, we get an additional 10% building aid on energy performance contracts, with voter authorization. So we would hope that the community would support that extra money from the state. So for Elm Drive Elementary School, again, very similar scope of work. It needs a full heating and ventilation system redesign and reconstruction. They have the same single pane windows we have here at the middle school. The roof is in a little bit better shape, does not need full replacement, but there would be some structural improvements done there as well. But really the focus here is on the HVAC system, the electrical system that supports it. Those panels, if you remember from our last building condition survey report, the electrical panels at Elm Drive were original to 1954, and they look it. There's apprehension that that infrastructure could support an upgraded heating and ventilation system, so that would be fully replaced as well. Some EPC work there too. Again, what you'll notice is the same chart, but there's no reserve line and there's no retiring debt because we're allocating the lion's share of that money to the biggest ticket item we have on the table. Now, if the board somehow decided not to work at the middle school, we could reallocate those funds here, but I think Caroline spent a lot of time and energy underscoring why the middle school needs to be the priority, and so we allocated the funding accordingly. We wanted to share the numbers out. And so, with that being said, for $9.3 million of new tax impacts to the taxpayers, offset by an EPC of about 1.2, we're looking at 33 cents per $1,000 of assessed
So
value.
the one before, what was the total? What screen before?
The tax, we'll look at the new tax impact. It's 8.7 versus 9.3. So they're very close in terms of the tax impact. And that's why the cost per thousand figures are so close as well.
And I think this is an area of confusion. People see, so $37 million is gonna cost me 32 cents per thousand, but you know, $12 million is gonna cost me 33. So just to underscore that all of the money, like the cash we have in reserves, earmarked for a capital project, the retiring debt, all of that is going to be front loaded. So that we would not have to borrow from, you know, the taxpayers essentially. We didn't have to take money from the taxpayers, unnecessarily. We would put all of that money to our priority, which is the middle school. And so none of that is factored into this. So even though the total project at Elm Drive would be significantly less than what we're looking at the middle school, the impact is the same because we don't have additional funds that we would be putting towards any secondary phases.
Thank you. That is confusing for many people.
Right, so, and then the simplest way to look at it is that new debt service line and compare, again, the 9.3 to the 8.7.
Right.
That's those numbers are close, and that's why these numbers are
So
close.
rough numbers, $500,000 house, fixed middle school, fixed Elm Drive, roughly 320, 350 a
Yeah,
year.
total, yeah.
Just about.
Mhm.
Okay, so again, applying the same logic to the Elm Drive building as to Alden Place. Alden Place also needs a heating and ventilation system upgrade. They also have a very old boiler. For some reason, when they did the project in 2013, they upgraded one boiler but not both. For those that may not remember, buildings are designed to handle 85% of the heat load on one boiler. So in the coldest of the winter, like the last few weeks we've had, we're really, lighting a candle every time we light that boiler up and hope that it's helping us keep that building warm. But we're facing a potential failure at Alden Place every winter with the existing plant that we have. And so replacing that boiler, upgrading the heating and ventilation plant, and adding in some of that EPC work. Again, the new debt service number is 8.9 million. And that would be 62 cents on the $1,000 of assessed value. Okay, and then the high school was the last piece that we looked at. The high school is the only building where the EPC scope actually outweighs the bonded work scope. So more than half of the work that we would like to do at the high school would be covered by the EPC, and that would have a 38 cents impact on the $1,000 assessed value. That would include adding ice storage, which is an efficiency upgrade. The chillers would be upgraded that would be the biggest component. And we currently do not have the capacity on our system to cool the gymnasium. So we can provide ventilation in the gym, but we can't effectively cool it. And so with the new regulations on what's commonly referred to as the heat index bill, we have to have considerations for providing cooling spaces or cooling centers in every building, or risk having to go remote or close school. So this would be, I'd say, of the three buildings, and we've touched on this previously, this would be the most proactive piece of the project in terms of least likely to fail catastrophically with any sort of immediacy, but certainly on that road should we keep delaying that work. And again, being our newest building, people keep asking us, that building, they just built the high school in relative terms. We just built it in 2006. Well, heating and ventilation systems are ready for the last 15 years. So we're just about at the approaching the end of useful life. That type of a system cannot be designed anymore by EPC regulations. It uses a different kind of refrigerant, so it's going to have to be upgraded sooner than later. And if we delay it, we risk a failure. And again, just with the age of that system, it took us 8 months to repair those chillers when we had the board authorize that as an emergency repair a couple of years ago. So definitely something to keep on the menu. And if the board chooses to not put that forward to the voters now, it is something that will have to come back for consideration in the future, again, sooner than later.
And I do think that's something we should just keep in the back of our minds with the high school. The HVAC system that is there is the only fresh air system. We're required to move fresh air into the buildings. We have the univents in this system, which brings fresh air in. The only way that we have fresh air in that building, which is required to keep school open, is to have that system up and functioning. So a failure in that building, even if for some reason we were able to maintain temperature, we can't maintain the fresh air flow. So a failure of that system could be catastrophic in terms of the high school.
Heather, can you bounce back through those spreadsheets? So, okay. 8 million worth of new debt service is 32 cents. Can you pay that? 9 is 33, okay. 8 is, how does 8, 9 turn to 62?
I did reach out to ask how the accumulation would be affected. So they gave us the numbers in a bubble, and I asked why that changes. There's a consideration for, and I don't want to misspeak, so please forgive me. There's an aidability component to some of the work that affects cost. So I need to, I got these numbers an hour before the meeting, so I want to go back and drill it down. Because it doesn't seem to be straight line correlated with.
Yeah, and if you go to the next one as well.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was an amortization issue because of the scope of work, or if it was a maximum cost allowance issue, but that's something that I need to go back to the financial planners and discuss.
Well, just so to anybody watching, listening, this may be something that we, have to readjust the probably the impact to the taxpayers piece, but, okay.
Yep, and again, our focus for all the reasons was on really peeling apart the middle school in Elm, and that was where a lot of the attention was spent. I do have a follow-up meeting to discuss some of the more nuanced work, and the financial planners did say, you know, if and when the board lands on whatever package the board wants to do, they'll recrunch all the numbers and give us that full long report that shows that that service.
I think if we can believe in these numbers and we can back into, 3 years ago, the median sales value, assessed value was 370 in Millbrook. So we can kind of just take that point and kind of back into it and say, I mean, I ran through it quick as you're doing it. It's probably like 800 a year for a $500,000 house. It might be less if once those numbers are adjusted, but I think if we know, kind of an idea, instead of maybe 32 cents on 1,000, maybe do $32 on 100,000. Just to make it easier for someone to say, oh, my house is probably worth 300, so it's gonna be $95 or whatever it might be.
And to your point, Chris, the other thing that I want to share too is, over the last 5-7 years, the district has accumulated $12 million in reserves. Right, every year we have a budget that we have to maintain very conservatively, but when every possible contingency doesn't come to fruition, there's a little bit of money left, we can put it towards a reserve. If we have an active project, we can put it directly towards the debt service and reduce the tax burden on the community. So we would have the ability to chip away at this every year. While we can't guarantee that, I would say, absent of a really terrible fiscal situation, in any given year, if there's any money left over when the board has the authority to assign money towards reserves, one of the places you can put the money is to the debt to offset future tax burdens of these projects.
And one thing we're gonna have to decide as a board is how we're going to put this up for vote. And without those numbers, we can't really do that. So once you have those, we could share them, that would be great. Or we could talk about it next meeting, right?
Do you want
Well, just to verify those last two slides are correct.
okay,
We can't really run the numbers or
yeah,
back
I
into
can
it.
verify that.
Really think, the community needs to know what worst case scenario, if this district cannot function. What it's gonna mean not only to the children, that go here and to the parents of those children, but to the community at large, if this district cannot function, to educate anyone. What it means to the entire, village, town, all 6 towns actually, and the village of Millbrook. It would be a major catastrophe for the children, their parents, people that own homes, their values would go down. I mean, we should actually come up with some kind of a list, not to scare people, but people think, okay, we don't want to pay any more taxes. Unfortunately, fortunately, I wish Albany would have to spend money like this to get public approval, but they don't. And I've said it before, they can tax and spend as much as they want with no public input. And they leave it to the local level with your towns and school districts that have to try to get pennies and dimes to fix things with public permission. People need to think beyond, well, it's gonna cost me $92 more a year for school taxes. I pay enough in school taxes. I'm on a fixed income. That's all true. But you have to look at the whole picture, from the children being educated to the entire community as a whole.
Well, and I think something that we just need to consider, the last thing we would ever want to do is to have to go remote even for a period of time. I don't think it's an effective means of educating students, for all of the obvious reasons. But when it happened during COVID, a lot of adults were also home and were able to provide supervision. A period of time with a closure could actually cost more in daycare costs. For even a month or two, could cost more in daycare costs than the entire tax increase for the year or for multiple years, actually. Daycare is quite expensive nowadays. And so though it's not something that we would want to do, it's a reality that people might be facing. If these buildings fail, like there is no telling, right, what will happen here. Thankfully, we haven't had an extremely cold winter, or at least we haven't had, like long time of extreme cold temperatures, but, it does put a strain on the boiler systems in both of our elementary schools. And so I think of that when I say it feels really irresponsible to move more kids into this building, but it also feels really irresponsible to move all kids into one elementary building, knowing that either boiler could go at any time. So when I think about those things, Howard, it is part of our goal is to avoid that what if scenario, because it's no matter what we do at this point in time, until we start chipping away at this list and start fixing things, we're really just moving a problem.
And the problem at this point. Which by the way, the thing at this point, is this building was built in 1960. And for whatever the reasons that previous boards that none of us were on did not maintain it properly, we are here today with the problem that now needs to be fixed.
And Howard, if we don't, and this is what the community has to do, understand, we're no better. If we keep kicking the can, it just keeps getting more money.
There's no more can, it's all rust, it's ready to crumble, so. That's all, go ahead.
I just have a question. So if I am looking at this, just in case anyone's watching or looking at it, the PPC work, I just wanted to ask you to explain it. If it's cost neutral, so say there it's $656,000. If it's cost neutral, why is it added into the total?
Because we want it to be authorized by the voters. So
There we go.
what we want to do is, and if you remember on the past votes, those numbers are listed separately. So if Millbrook Middle School was a proposition unto itself,
Mhm.
the voters would see the 37, 194, 511 and the 656, 251 listed separately. And just to be fully transparent, we want to communicate that those come together for $37 million worth of work.
If they don't authorize that, then we don't get that aid.
We don't get that this way.
That's just the worth of work.
Right.
That's not the actual cost.
Right.
That's the tax number.
Right, the numbers, like the what affects me number is that 87, 82, 473.
Right.
That's the number that affects your tax bill as homeowners in the district.
Thank you.
Not for nothing, but also we're talking about dollars of about $90 or so for someone who has the house value for approximately 500.
If it's 500, it'd be like 160.
And to Howard's point, part of this fixed income costs are high, but with the hard work of the administration for parents in the district, we have saved about $65 a month per student for those who are buying school lunch. They don't have to pay for school lunch. That is something to think about, offsetting that cost. It might not affect someone who doesn't have children in the district, but for all the 700 to 800 students we have, if they are taking advantage of the free lunch, that is a huge savings, and that is on a monthly basis. So it's more than the $95 for the year. That's just per month.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is a great,
That's a good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Board President, Vice President report. Couple of things from my standpoint. We had our Dutchess County School Board Association meeting. There's a tour that you can sign up for of BOCES if you want to see the CTI classrooms and there'll actually be kids in there working. You want to see what we pay for and what kids are getting out of it. I think there's one on the 11th and one on, I forget what day, what was the day of the other one, Cheryl, do you remember?
I don't.
Anyway, you can go to either one. I think I'm gonna try to go to the 11th. Anyway, it's just, I think it's something that's gonna become more and more prevalent as we move forward with, kids switching to the construction industry. So might be something you wanna look at. It also, said that the seminar for, or workshop for prospective new board members is coming up March 15th. If anybody's interested, it doesn't mean you're signing up, just means you're, you're interested. I think it's the 15th. Yeah, March 15th. We also met with, Edie Barrett. Basically to, put it nicely, whine and complain about the amount of, funded, edicts that come out of Albany. The fact that this electric bus thing is the stupidest thing on the face of the earth. Not the least of which is Hyde Park basically spent a ton of money getting a whole, like all the aid and grants and all this stuff. They put it up, which was like, I think the buses turned out there were like 30,000 after they got all these different sources of funding. And the people in Hyde Park voted it down. So how are you supposed to meet this edict that came out of the Albany? And still have, the citizens can still vote it down, and now you can't meet those numbers. Complained a little bit about, budgets, like, funding of foundation aid. It started out, I think, pretty well, but, little by little, you're starting to see it chisel away. That was an interesting complaint to the assemblyman type of meeting. I don't really think there much will actually come out of it, but it was an interesting opportunity to just whine, I guess. And I think, and if you're interested, probably because you have nothing, you're bored. There are 3 seats on the Dutchess County BOCES board that are available.
You don't have to be a board member in your district.
No.
So if anyone's listening and is interested in that, that's also something that any community member would be eligible for.
But anyway, I think that was all I had from, there's two folks running, I think, for 3 seats, Ralph Gemetto and Gully Sanford. And nominees cannot reside in Beacon, Pauling, Red Hook, or Wappingers, I think, because they already have people on the board. So anyway, that was, I think that was it for me. Chris?
I was just gonna, we didn't say before, encourage anyone listening or, if you have questions, concerns, issues, whatever it might be on the capital project. Come to a board meeting, post a question online, call the administration. Don't take the risk of getting the right answers on social media. We'll be glad to help you. We'll be glad to give you the straight answers and open and honest. So feedback is good.
Good. All right, Caroline?
So due to the time, I will be brief, but my report is in the board docs for anyone interested. Some things I have not yet highlighted. Back in December, students at the middle school participated in the annual hour of code, and since then, Mr. Miller has been working with students on special activities and hosting guest speakers to introduce students to career opportunities within the field of computer science, so that's exciting. We also had middle school 6th graders explored languages, so they were able to meet with both the French teacher and the Spanish teacher, Miss Hard and Miss Nairetti, and they were able to learn a little bit about what the experience could be like next year in 7th grade, starting their language other than English exploration. And so they will make a commitment in a very exciting activity in March. So that's exciting. And then we will have engineers here visiting our classrooms from Discovery, on February 18th to engage our K2 learners in some hands-on activities. Additionally, Elm Drive has their characteristic of the month, which is kindness and empathy, so their characteristics of the month. Kindness and empathy, and Ms. O'Connell is visiting classrooms to deliver lessons on that theme. They're also working on the habitude of adaptability this month. So very busy at our little Elm Drive location. We are seeking a modified softball coach for anyone who is interested. You can contact myself, Mr. Cabello, or Mr. Hamill. Elm Drive had a lockdown drill on February 7th to remain compliant with state requirements, and they had a debrief just the other day to talk about sort of goals and grows from that drill experience. I have listed some upcoming events there for you. The 100th day of school is, of course, weather permitting that we get here on Thursday. Otherwise, we will have to bump that celebration out. But we are crossing our fingers as we watch the forecast that we will get here and they will be able to have their tall small ball. That's very important to our youngest learners. Around February 20th, there will be an Elm Drive Cowboys versus Giants Spirit Day in honor of Mr. Albert. And some long-range planning for anyone who is interested. And Perry did mention a tour of the CTI facility, and actually our high school students went today. So 10th graders who are interested, I believe I mentioned it at the last meeting, but they went today to tour the potential program offerings for next year. And there's some really exciting new offerings that I heard about on their return, upon their return. So pretty cool. Let's see what students are interested for next year.
Very good.
Thank
Any questions for Caroline?
Thank you.
All right. Facilities.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just gonna read a couple of things off the plate that I got on the board docs. Installation of all touchless faucets in all buildings is now 100% complete. We did all in-house. Previously, it was done by Bosey's outsourced, and we did all the rest of the work ourselves. Great job, you guys. I want to just thank them. Emergency roof repairs have been completed in the middle school in rooms 45 and 56, so we were able to get the kids back in their rooms. Hopefully repairs hold and there's no classrooms. And we also repaired 4 steam leaks in classrooms at Elm and the Univents. Pipes, like Mr. Garcia said before, they're aging, they're rusting, so we're constantly going into rooms trying to stop the leaks. So the systems are holding them together, patching. So that's all I got. If anybody has any questions?
Questions?
How is the auditorium looking in the middle school?
It's closed in the middle school and the ceiling. There's no new damage yet. So once the ice and snow start melting up there, I'm sure we're gonna have more ceiling tiles falling down or pieces of plastic. So it's a shame that the kids can't perform in there. It's like a big inconvenience, I think. They have to go to the high school and juggle all around different areas. So to anybody listening, public, we really need these repairs done. Otherwise, it's just a matter of time.
Hey, John, I got just a different question. The lights in the auditorium in the high school,
Yeah.
they pop off and on
I'm
and
on it. We upgraded the system. And I know the upgrades to the existing system that was there triggered something off in it. So I think the system was too new and too powerful for it. So we do have contractors that are gonna come out and do the repairs. We had electricians come out, they couldn't figure it out, but I finally got a good company that's what they specialize in. So they should be out any day now. So that should be taken. I'm on it. Should be taken care of.
thanks, John. Anything else?
Thank you.
How about Alden?
All right,
Mr. Tom?
hi everyone. So I just have a few notes from what I already put in here. But Dr. Sobrin, our math coach, visited Alden Place classrooms today with a focus on Eureka Square instruction. She had worked at the end of last year and over the summer to adjust the math pacing schedule. And she was pleased with the teachers being on track as they move forward through the Eureka modules. Dr. Sober will be here back working with Alden teachers on March 27 and April 1st, 1 month ahead of state math testing. Next, I attended the counseling session that Mr. Chanowski and Mr. Freer presented regarding building relationships with the community. The fourth graders that they worked with were just wonderful. Yeah, it was just a really pleasant experience to see their enthusiasm and the amount of questions that they had. They were focused when other people were talking, and just a remarkable lesson. And I think when I was writing these different things with regard to our counselors, and I asked for their input, and you could see the enthusiasm in their words that they shared with me about all the different themes that they're covering. And it's a great program for us. Really appreciate it. The new program for us this next week is called Pizza with the Pros. And it's a big time event for us on February 19th. 68 students are going to participate from 4th grade through 12th grade. And so the place it's put on by Music Boosters. We thank them for that, and it'll be hopping at Alden Place next Wednesday. The Alden Place Junior Interact will be focused on the SPCA of Dutchess County for the next few meetings. They've done this event for many years where they collect food, towels, litter, etc. for the SPCA of Dutchess County. We're excited about the Alden Place Science Fair coming up on February 26th. Mrs. Stewart and Mrs. Webb are co-advisors this year. And they have roughly 35 projects and 43 students participating. The fair is judged by 6 of our Carey Institute scientists in the morning of the 26th. And the public showing and awards begin at 6:30 p.m. that evening at Alden Place. And looking forward further, the elementary all county band will meet on March 7th and 8th this year, and we're proud of our participants. Actually, I think it's the all county chorus meet on those dates. I don't have band dates at this point, so
It's the same.
same day. All right, well, all right. Thank you.
Very good. Any questions for Tom?
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. All right, Elliot?
So I'm gonna start off, with where the budget timeline starts off for each year. So in January, myself, Mr. Garcia and Dr. Watkins met with our principals and department heads and started to talk about, wants, wishes, needs for next year, so that we can begin to build the budget. On January 21st, we got our initial aid runs from the governor's office. That touted a 2% increase in foundation aid, which is not untrue. However, when you look at the total aid package, we actually received a decrease. So an increase in foundation aid, but a decrease in aid overall. So we're actually losing money on some aid or revenue sources that we rely on heavily. So we are hoping that as subsequent runs become available with the input from the houses, that we will hopefully do a little bit better than we're looking right now. So something just to be considerate of. And I think Elliot had spoken about this last meeting with the potential revenue run. was the pre-K. One of the biggest factors that we have there is like a pre-K number, and that actually is sort of irrelevant because they give us this big total, I think it's like $240,000, but we really only get $5,400 per student, so that's enrollment based. So that's something that isn't a real number. We're looking at a significant decrease in like transportation and stuff, so Elliot will go through more of that, but everyone is celebrating this 2% foundation aid increase, but when you look at the total aid package, many districts are actually down. We are one of those 3 districts. So with a general budget preview in terms of our budgeting priorities, they're fairly consistent with previous years. It is our goal, when possible, to bring our students who are placed in out-of-district placements back to educate them here with their neighborhood peers. That is something that, you know, as long as it is appropriate based on their needs and we can meet their needs here, we want to do that because it is their right to be here. So long as we can meet their needs and give them adequate support. We're also working to build a special ed consortium of sorts with the smaller districts in the region. Myself and Dr. Watkins attended a meeting this past Friday, and actually we had more participation than I was even thinking we would. So we had Spackett Hill, Dover, Rhinebeck, Pauling, Red Hook, and Weevatuck all in one virtual room, but having conversations and sharing information about the special education programs that we have running in each of our buildings at each of our grade levels and sort of the profile of the student, so to speak, that is being serviced in each of those programs so that we can make sure that we find a placement for any of our students that we're looking for, but also not duplicate programs that might exist 10 minutes up the road. You know, we're not too far from any of the districts that I just mentioned. I'm sorry, Pine Plains is also there as well. So really having conversations about what exists in each of our districts so that if we have someone with needs, we're not running 2 programs, you know, with 4 kids and 4 kids, but we can have one room with 8 kids and really sort of expand their horizons a little bit and give them exposure to students with similar needs and interests. So we're looking at that. And then we continue to update and align budget codes and descriptions. One of the examples that we gave is that we have set a graduation budget code. We've set an E&L budget code. And the reason for that is just to be very clear as to where the money is going and why. Our E&L program has expanded significantly, almost doubled in the past year. And so for that reason, we have aligned the budget code so that we know exactly how much money we are spending in that program, but also how much money we need to project to spend based on the number of students we have. And then we want to allocate adequate funding for escalating maintenance and repair costs where possible for aging equipment and infrastructure. And Elliot is going to walk a little bit through just budgetary considerations.
So, we've talked about this a couple of times, and I'll show you a chart that tracks it year over year, but this year the state tells us, or every year the state tells us our inflation growth factor. So this year the state is telling us that based on inflation, our allowable growth factor for our tax cap formula is 2.95. They're acknowledging that inflation in our region has gone up approximately 3%. And then right behind that, they say, but your tax levy growth factor is only 2%. That's why you keep hearing commonly referred to as the 2% tax cap. It's because that's the factor, that tax levy growth factor is capped at 2% growth. I'll show you in a couple of slides how that is translated over time for Millbrook specifically. Again, Caroline already told you, our overall financial aid, foundation aid package is up 2%. We're down 1.9%, and I'll show you what the dollar figures are in our year over year chart. And that's not including the roughly $100,000 that we do not expect to actually be funded by the pre-K best case scenario number. Again, they tell us 280. We've been averaging 100 to 140 on that aid line the last couple of years. I do not expect it to go beyond that. Okay, so that's the revenue side, right? Part of this experiment, this process every year is to calculate what our expected expenditures are and then calculate our expected revenues and they have to match to balance the budget. So those are the revenues. The expense side of the story is that our health insurance consortium is projecting a rate increase of 8.4%. So again, in the year that inflation is up 3%, our allowable tax levy growth factor is 2%. Our health insurance costs are going up roughly 8.5%. That translates to $571,000 for Millbrook's budget. So when I show you that the general fund is projecting a 5% increase year over year from this current year to next year's preliminary projection that we're sharing with you tonight, I want you to remember that $571,000 of that is strictly for health insurance benefit costs for our employees. Okay? That's 24% of our budget to budget increase. So we already highlighted this as well, but we created a family of budget codes to track E&L expenses. We've also increased athletic equipment budget lines for replacing inventory that's aging out. Again, very parallel to our capital improvement conversation. The athletic facility was largely constructed between 2013 and 2015. We're 10 years into it. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes bad after 8 to 10 years and in the 10 to 15 year band. So we're starting to budget for those things that are going to fall off in the next couple of years. We're trying to establish a formula that gets us there cleanly.
So, in terms of additions to the budget, at this point, we are conservatively saying there will be none. We cannot add to our budget. And in fact, one of the things that we are looking at now is positions we are not replacing due to attrition. So, there will be 2 elementary teaching positions that we will not be replacing, one due to retirement and one in early resignation for personal reasons of a teacher will be relocating out of state and much to her dismay and ours, she will not be able to continue her employment here. She has let us know that. And so we will not be replacing either position. And we do have a plan for how we will be, absorbing those 2 positions within our staffing structure. We will definitely not be replacing one secondary teacher and not be replacing a personnel assistant position either. To note, these are preliminary conversations around the budget. There's still additional aid funds that we will be looking at going forward to know exactly where we will land. But the reality is that we may be looking at additional staffing cuts. It may be required, right? And that is something that we just want to be able to be transparent with the board about at this time and
So here's your first look at the revenue projections year over year. You can see I've shared this chart before, so we're trying to keep it relatively consistent and straightforward for both the board and folks watching at home. These are the large categories of funds that you'll see in our budget lines. And so 24-25 current year budget is 34,575,075. This projection of next year's budget is putting us at 36,344,270. That's a $1.7 million increase. Again, 571,000 of that is wholly absorbed by our health insurance benefit program. So the balance of the 700,000 that's left is the cost of everything else that's going up. We're not adding anything programmatically or staffing wise to this budget. This is strictly the cost of doing business increasing year over year.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes, sir.
I asked last year and I'll ask again, why is on top line, why is the Board of Education budget going up 8.83%? And $6,000 is more than just, a payroll increase for the Board of Education's clerk.
Give me 1 second, sir. I'm pulling up for you.
Unless they want to give, raise the Board of Education members' salary from 0 to 0 plus 0.
No, sir. I would love to, but I don't have the authority to do that for you. Our Board of Education expenses are increasing Okay, so the 8.83, I can tell you, the lines that were affected were legal advertising.
Okay.
The cost of advertising for legal services and legal related matters was
Okay.
increased. The line item for the district clerk salary is there. It is a very small, the smallest part of that
Okay.
category of codes. That's based on a very conservative projection.
Sorry about that,
Well
sure.
deserved.
But
Reserve code.
the other piece of this, Mr. Shapiro, to answer your question, is we had to increase the funding for our election workers. We had 2 additional budget votes this year. And so in
Got it.
anticipation of having another vote, there's a cost
Okay.
associated with doing those votes of approximately $5,000.
Thank you.
So you're seeing an increase of $6,000, and I'm gonna say roughly 4 to 5 of that is the cost of board meetings.
Right, but see, this is the type of thing that we need to make the public aware that we're watching and you're explaining. Because otherwise, somebody just looks at it and says, where's this money going? So, and that's why the board members really need to ask for explanations so the public can hear it. Number one, yes, we're asking that we're watching the public money and the nickels and dimes. So it can go to the much needed capital, improvements. And then they can, they feel they trust us with managing the money. Thank you for your explanation.
You're welcome. I will say, well, we don't have the tripartite breakdown. That's usually in a later presentation, but our preliminary numbers do show that both admin and capital expenses have been reduced in this draft of the budget in favor of program expenses. So we're trying
And
to
that's
put,
where it should be.
we're trying to put the money where the kids are.
That's
And
right.
and so we're gonna break that down for you once there's
With the
there's
final
expense categories that haven't been finalized, and that's why we don't have that today. But at an upcoming meeting, when we show that, that is where we're trending. We're
So I
trending
will
that.
not have to ask this question again. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. So again, and to your point though, Mr. Shapiro, like you said, we look at those differences on that right-hand column, and I really want the board to understand that sometimes that's movement within, but the most important number is the one in the bottom right-hand corner. That's the overall growth of the budget year over year at 5.12%. So now to match revenues, and this is where things get a little bit dicey. I wanted to show our revenue projections, and in this slide in particular, I want you to also see that the adopted budget versus the expected revenues do change regularly from April when you adopt the budget to when we're living with the budget in the current year. And so, this year in particular, we got some more revenue than we thought, but not necessarily where we wanted it. So you'll see that if you look at our state aid numbers, we're down $20,000 in state aid. Not a huge deficit, but the fact is we don't always get the money we're promised. And last year that number was closer to $300,000. But you can see that the best case scenario is that number stays flat, but everything else is going up. Everything on the expense side of our budget is going up. We're eliminating things that we can control, but there's a whole lot of things we can't control. Our over 70% of our revenue comes from the tax levy, and the tax levy itself is capped. So when state aid needle doesn't move or goes down, and our ability to raise the lion's share of our revenue is hamstrung by state regulation, we're gonna create revenue gaps. And so right now, the challenging part of this story is that in order to balance this budget, we have to appropriate $2.5 million of this year's money towards next year's budget. That's a little daunting. Last year's number was 1.7. Our preliminary budget was 2 million, and we committed to the board that we were gonna do everything we can to shrink it, and we shrunk it about $300,000. So I give you the same message today with the same sense of hope, but I don't really know where that's all coming from at this time. We are working very hard to reduce that $2.5 million number. We're trying to do that as you heard Caroline say, we're waiting for additional state aid runs. Our treasurer was on the phone with 3 different people in Albany this week trying to figure out if, or I'll say vet and verify the numbers in our first state aid run. Hey, did you forget something? Did you miss something? Our transportation aid is projected to be down over $200,000 from this year to next year. So there's big chunks of aid that are being reduced while the foundation aid is being kept at that 2% increase. There's other things that are giving, that are putting us in this position. So.
Ellie, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any, And I don't know, I mean, can you competitively shop for benefits?
So we are part of the Dutchess Health Insurance Consortium. Without speaking pro or con about the consortium or its natural competitor, I will say that the most viable alternate option has had much higher year-over-year fluctuations that are much harder to budget.
I was just curious.
There's
That's
really,
a big fluctuation.
there's the state game, you know, there's other games in town, but there's been greater fluctuation in those arenas than there have been in the Dutchess County Health Insurance Consortium, and so it's steep, but it's been more consistent than some of the others.
Okay.
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
The number of, is it ENL? Students ELL? So,
Yeah, so the students are called English language learners,
Right.
so ELL.
so we do not get anything from the state when we have children that come in that need to be taught in another language. Is that correct?
So that is part of we do, it's an expense-driven aid, but I'm not seeing where it is, and I can't really read this too well. We do,
Okay,
but we don't get a whole lot. We also get some grant money, but it's, really like a pittance in comparison to what it costs to educate a child.
right, right.
So we do get some. I don't know as though it's necessarily like in the next year respectively. Sometimes those things are delayed out because when they are calculated for at a particular time of year. But we do, it's one of our expense-based aids, but even the calculations for those and the threshold of what is considered, I know for special education, a high-cost student. You know, it has to meet a minimum threshold to be considered. So it's not nearly enough.
Thank you.
So we wanted to illustrate, I shared these charts last year, we updated them for this year, so we wanted to show the board, you know, kind of sometimes the picture tells the story better than the numbers do. So the blue line that you see on your screen, that's the fluctuation of the inflation factors over the last 6 years, from 2019 to 2025. We had a spike of about 8% in the 24-25 school year. You can see we haven't been under 2% since 22-23, but our ability to levy taxes has been almost flat for the entirety of that 6-year period. Which means we've been reliant on other sources of revenue, which for us is only 23% of our revenue budget, give or take. And so we've had to make up the gap in those two curves through reductions and through like all the things that Caroline was saying, bringing kids back into the district when we can, if it's the best thing for the kid and it saves us money, it's a great plan. But you know, sometimes we have unforeseen expenses that push us the other way. And the blue line here is just to show you that sometimes our costs are growing faster than we can keep up. And so this chart directly relates to the next chart, which again shows the same comparison of our tax cap, our tax levy, and the appropriation. But I really want you to see how close the blue and yellow lines were in 2018-19 when we only needed $375,000 of last year money to help next year balance the books. And as those curves widen out, and you can see that 22-23 blip, no judgment, but we did not levy at the maximum. And for a number of years prior to 2018, we did not levy at the max. And over the last couple of years, there's that gap between blue and yellow is widening. And that's showing you that that's the problem that we're facing every year with our budget, is trying to bring them closer together while external factors are pushing them further apart. And the only way that we can bring them closer together is to intentionally reduce our expenses. And we keep looking for new ways to do that. Unfortunately, human capital is one of our largest expenses, followed by building grounds and infrastructure. And our building and grounds infrastructure is deteriorating. The cost of utilities are increasing. The cost of human capital is increasing. And so, unfortunately, we're looking at a potential trend of those curves widening, the gap between those curves further widening out, and we're doing everything we can to mitigate it.
And so obviously, as in years past, we will continue to fine tune these numbers with any updated information we get. As Elliot had mentioned, he and Ashley have been trying to sort of shake the trees at state ed and make sure that the numbers that they are reporting to us are actual, fair, appropriate numbers, specifically mentioning the transportation aid, which is significantly decreased. So as we have more information, we will bring that forward to you. We'll also be anticipating some updated state aid runs, which hopefully will show a different additional revenue that will be sent to the district. And then we will be looking at, to the extent possible, looking at both these purchases and subscriptions in terms of just understanding both the expenses there and any aid we will be getting back for anything from this year. And then eventually we will have that tripartite three-part budget explaining the program administrative and capital costs to the Board of Education and the taxpayers. And at this time, if you have any questions, we can.
Can we please update the website budget for the capital project with this and the prior capital project slide information?
With a slide on it. Yeah,
And the like correct dates, because those website, those dates have passed, just updated all this information.
yeah, the budget, all the budget information is updated now for the current year. Other than new slides being, like this new stuff going on, just the capital project, because we don't have information for it yet. Until you decide what we're doing, I can't really put anything on the website.
Are you allowed to just be for now, because it still says like November 19th?
Well, we don't have a
But I don't
commitment
have
from the board to even put
Oh, you're
this
not
out.
allowed to do that yet.
You
Even the
know,
date.
you haven't approved anything, so I can't put a project up there until I know what you're
Could
doing.
we approve the date? I mean, could we put,
But there is no vote if there is no.
okay.
There's
You
nothing
need the
for me to
cod, you
do
need
until
the, you need the.
tell me
How
what
about
you're doing.
removing the
You need
old?
the, I know, can we remove the old one? And then when would we, is next board meeting? Are we doing that? So.
So
That's
can we
parent
put
fee.
up that the general vote is on? the
It is, that's all updated on the website. It's just that one little box
Just
that
not
says
the
capital project. And until you say, go ahead and do this, I can't change that information.
So at the next meeting, we need to say, we're gonna do the normal budget, that part of the vote and the, we want an X million dollar project, is number one or two, I guess. The second part we're gonna do is one big thing, or we're not, we're gonna split that. So we need to bring, decide the next meeting, what those items are.
That's why verifying those slides are important, Elliot, just because.
Yeah, because then there's also the timeline of when the bond council when we have to get that bond, that whole huge document that has to be put out into the newspapers. We have to put that out, and that has to happen in March. And I believe that's early in March, so really, next meeting, you have to decide what you're doing on the capital project, so that we can actually make the timeline for May.
So I'm assuming between now and then, we can have a meeting of that complete, to go through. Group this stuff into one, group this stuff into two, bring it into the board as a recommendation, then we can go from there. Okay? All right. Any other questions? All right. Amy?
Okay, so, there is a lot of great things happening, particularly this Friday is our upcoming superintendent's conference day. So I've been working really hard with our consultants and our teachers to develop things, to support our ongoing growth. So we have Shelley Klein is coming back to work specifically in Alden Place with grades 3 and 4. Our ELA and social studies departments are gonna have, part of their day spent with our consultant Garrett, Jones-Roy is coming back just to continue on the writing. Our ENL teachers are actually going to join that because of some workshops they've recently gone to and having conversations with Anna Nairati just on that work and what Garrett's doing, connected them to see the crossover and really overlap of what they're teaching our students to do. Cam Lattenville, our technology integration specialist, is going to hold several sessions throughout the day with various grade levels on using school AI and Brisk, really focusing on Brisk for artificial intelligence on ways that it can help streamline parts of the teacher's day. And also revisits at the November conference day. Several of our teachers were invited to attend for no cost to Arlington for become formative super certified. For those teachers that were not able to do that, Kim is holding a follow-up. Formative is a way for the teachers to assess whether at the beginning or the end of a lesson, what the students have learned or mastered from that content. The really, I feel exciting part, particularly for our elementary teachers. If you've seen the elementary report card, it is standards based. So for the teachers, it's not just here's a worksheet, here's what you got on it. They really have to align that worksheet and be able to pull out what standards they were measuring. So formative is a nice way. It has the standards built into it. So as they're writing those questions, they can see where they're aligned within the standards. World Language is also working to identify whether they will be creating their own checkpoint A exam or deciding if we are going to purchase one. So we have a lot of great things coming up. So I'm excited and I'll share more at the next board meeting on how that all went. You already heard from Mr. Lipka about Angela spending time this week. But also this wasn't in my report, but came after I submitted it. Just congratulations to the middle school. So this past fall, the Schools to Watch Committee at the middle school worked really hard for the redesignation. There's a very, very lengthy application process that is involved, and the middle school was just found out this week that they were awarded the redesignation. So members of the staff will be invited to Washington, D.C. to receive their redesignation trophy. So we're excited to see who will be attending that, but congratulations to these. Yay, right? We all need some good news now then, right? So I started with the instructional, but just also let you know, coming up, the election fair, electives fair, so middle school already had theirs. High school is working on, Mr. Sipe and I talked about surveying the students just to see what kind of electives they were interested in seeing. And then providing the students an opportunity to hear more about each of the electives that could be potentially offered. So that'll be happening. Also, you may have heard last week in the Millbrook Minute, the Skills Trade Fair is going to be held in Arlington on March 6th from 6 to 8. So we want to make sure that anyone listening at home, we encourage you to investigate that if that's of interest to you. And then I also listed some upcoming grants in the area, particularly for our graduating seniors. And just to celebrate our school counselors. So the first week of February is always School Counselor Week, National School Counselor Week. So we didn't have a board meeting, but I would like to give a shout out to our counselors. You had a highlight from what Mr. Lipka was saying, and that is new this year, having elementary counselors at the 3-5 level. So it's really nice to get that feedback on how that is going, but we thank them for all that they are doing and continue to do as they attended the field trip just today going to CTI. So they're very busy these. We like to keep them busy. So any questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you.
Good. All right. Future agenda items, questions, comments?
None.
None? Okay, we have, do we still need this? Yes. All right, just for everybody, we need to go into executive session again. This time to discuss a specific employee. That does not mean that the meeting is over when we come back. It means that if we decided anything, we may need to come back and take action. So with that said, do I have a motion to go to executive session? Do I have a second? Second. All in favor?
I.
Any against?